Morning, everyone. It's officially January 25th, and here's your morning news update. To all those who have become paid subscribers over the past 24 hours, thank you so much for supporting my work. If you don't do that already and you want to support my work, the easiest way to do so is by clicking the paid subscription button below and upgrading your subscription. As always, these morning and evening news updates are about 4 or 5 minutes in length. We'll talk about the news and we'll move on. You're just going to get the facts. So let's dive right in. Late last night, Donald Trump fired 12 inspector generals who investigate waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. These inspector generals, many of them were actually appointed by Donald Trump in his first term, but are meant to provide safeguards for the administration for something that when something goes wrong in one of these agencies, the inspector general investigates it and provides a report to Congress. The inspector generals he terminated include those at the Department of Defense, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. This termination was illegal because inspector generals need 30 days notice prior to termination, and yet they didn't get 30 days notice here. Terminations were effective immediately, so we'll see whether or not they hold up. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth was confirmed officially, becoming only the second cabinet nominee in history to have to require a vice presidential tie-breaking vote. It was 50-50, with 3 Republican senators voting against the Hegseth nomination: Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, and Susan Collins from Maine. And then J.D. Vance came to the United States Capitol, voted to break the tie, and Pete Hegseth will be the next Secretary of Defense. But many are speculating now that Mitch McConnell vote, and given the fact that it was so close for Hegseth, does not bode well for someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who may bleed even more Republican support than just those 3 senators. So we'll see what happens. But at least right now, Hegseth has been confirmed. Gabbard and Kash Patel, the 2 next real controversial picks of Donald Trump's, they have their confirmation hearings scheduled for January 30th, and I will be covering them as they come in. So we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, Donald Trump had an extremely, quote, fiery conversation with the Prime Minister of Denmark, such that there is now chaos within the country, with the Danish people or the Danish government scared that Donald Trump will impose a massive tariff on the country, and that he is actually serious about possibly taking Greenland and its 57,000 people. The Danish Prime Minister and the Danish government didn't really think Donald Trump was serious, and that it was just kind of a online or some kind of ploy, but he was very serious on the phone call. And as a result, the Danish government is now very, very worried. Some good news in Washington, D.C. The pandas are back. 2 giant pandas are officially back on display at the Washington, D.C. Zoo. They are on loan from China. They will be here until April 2034 for about 10 years. Meanwhile, Mexico refused to accept a deportation flight, according to NBC News. There were 3 deportation flights that were scheduled this week. 2 went to Guatemala. 1 was scheduled to go to Mexico, and Mexico refused. Now, the White House is saying that it was an administrative issue that was fixed and the flight was able to take off, but we don't have confirmation of that just yet. Meanwhile, I reported yesterday about the ICE raid, or the alleged ICE raid, in Chicago public schools. Chicago public schools have now come out and said that it was not an ICE raid, but rather it was Secret Service seeking to investigate an 11-year-old boy at the elementary school for a video he made about Donald Trump. So it's interesting that Secret Service would come to an elementary school, spook fears about possible ICE raids, just to investigate an 11-year-old. The Supreme Court has taken on a major case this term concerning whether or not Oklahoma can establish the country's first ever religious charter school. Oklahoma's Catholic Church wants to now use taxpayer funds to create a charter school, a public charter school for students to attend. The Oklahoma Supreme Court previously said this is a violation of the First Amendment. The separation of church and state must be upheld, essentially. That was a 7-1 decision. And many thought that that was kind of final, but apparently the United States Supreme Court disagreed. The United States Supreme Court will consider this case in its next term to see whether or not Oklahoma can establish the nation's first ever taxpayer-funded religious school. Folks, that's all the news that you may have missed overnight. It was relatively a slow night. I mean, Donald Trump did try to purge inspector generals, so I wanted you guys to be aware of that. As always, let me know your thoughts on this format. If you haven't become a paid subscriber yet, you can do so easily to support my work by clicking the button below, and I will see you this evening for our evening news update.